We are being recorded. So good evening to all, and it's nice to have you here on our shir that relates to Kiddush Levana. Okay, Kiddush Levana. That's our discussion tonight. I did send out the Mar Makaimes. I'll place it on the screen later on when we get to it. Baruch Hashem, usually when things operate the way they should, we have here in Shul between Mincha Ma'ariv every day, a limud, we learn some Torah, we study halacha. We've been doing it here already, Baruch Hashem, for 11 years. And I have Talmidim, I see here, for example, Josh. Josh is a Talmid, he listens and he has good ha'ores. And others as well, Kenny and Baruch Hashem, we have good Talmidim that come between Mincha Ma'ariv. Unfortunately, we don't have the Mincha Ma'ariv opportunity during this Magefa, during this plague. So I try to compensate a little bit with my daily message. Baruch Hashem, we have Shiurim, and my goal is on a Thursday night shir is to cover some halachic issues, a little bit of history, a little bit of historical background, and studying the era, not just the halacha. In the past, we've discussed Kiddush Levana. Kiddush Levana. The bulk of discussions we've had over the years relate to the last moment you have the ability to make Kiddush Levana. What does that mean? So number one, Kiddush Levana is considered a significant mitzvah. The Gemara tells us that it's comparable to Kabbalas Pnei Hashchina. It is like welcoming the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, it is viewed as significant. There's an old tradition that you are not supposed to say Kiddush Levana under a roof. Therefore, many authorities note that the proper way is to do it under the sky. It's not ma'akiv, it's not a must, but that's the ideal way that we make the Kiddush Levana. The Rabbi Yoel Sirkis notes that the concept of not being under a roof is because you are greeting the Almighty. When you greet a king, when you greet a great authority, you make your way out to greet the individual. So too when it comes to Kiddush Levana. Now, what is Kiddush Levana? So it is a blessing where we express our gratitude for this entity called the moon, and it illuminates the world. It is also significant due to the fact that the moon has represented the people of Israel and does represent the people of Israel because we shine light, but it's a reflection. Our light and our essence is not what we are, but rather we reflect something quite great, and that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore we relate to the moon because Kiddush Levana is really for us a tool to recognize our significance in our role. So Kiddush Levana has been considered an important bracha due to the fact that it is time-bound, due to the fact that it is a mitzvah essay shazman gromo, due to the fact that it is to be said during a specific period during the month. Women are not obligated to do it. And also there were many communities where women had the custom not to do it, meaning not just they didn't have to, but they felt this is something that should not be done. That was the custom in many communities. And different explanations are given. Some of them are harsh explanations. For example, the Shloach Kodesh notes that it is due to the fact that the moon and the fact that it does not have the same level of illumination like the sun was due to the original sin, due to the Chet and Gan Eden of eating the forbidden fruit. The one who brought about that violation of the will of God was the woman. So therefore, it is as if the way the Shloah said it is that women are to blame, and therefore they don't get the mitzvah of Kiddush Levana. I don't know, he probably said it after his wife passed away. That's my feeling, because I don't think she would like his insight. But there were communities that women did not. Other communities, I know my mother, she should be healthy. She had the tradition of, yes, doing Kiddush Levana. In our family, it was a big thing Among my father had all these, I'm not going to use chas v'shalom the word mishugasin, it's not kiburav, but he had many areas that he was extremely sensitive to in Jewish practice, which is wonderful. Obviously, we should all be careful. There were things that practices that were part of what were done at home, and one of them was, this is an interesting one, my father would always feel uncomfortable to travel during the month if he didn't do Kiddush Levana. Maybe some other ones from your old timers could tell me that that was the normal way of thinking in the 1950s. I don't know. Obviously, it has sources. I'll show the sources very soon. But it was a big thing in the family that my father had. You don't travel before you say Kiddush Levana. And missing Kiddush Levana was considered a very problematic thing that would be emotionally devastating if you missed a Kiddush Levana. So often when we discuss Kiddush Levana, we talk about how long we have. In other words, when is the appropriate time? And by when do you have to be sure you said it? In other words, when is the cutoff? Meaning, Kiddush Levana has to be said when the moon is in the process of waxing, as it is growing. It comes to an end, that growth comes to an end halfway through the month when there's a full moon. So, logically speaking, when there's a full moon, that's when you no longer could do Kiddush Levana. But what if you don't have the internet? Go back 2,000 years ago, where they did not know exactly when the full moon is, right? They did not know precisely. They had an average, an idea. So till when would they say Kiddush Levana? So many authorities note you have the first 15 days of the month because it's half a month. But others note, no, that's not good enough. You have to be more precise. You have to know when the new moon was, when the molad was, and then take the length of a month, which is about 29 days, 12 hours, and a couple minutes, slice it in half, and it has to be within that period of time. Fine, so this most of the discussion relates to what is your cutoff? By when do you have to be sure that you said your Kiddush Levana? There's a very interesting tshuva, which I didn't send to you, but I'll share it with you. The Chassam Sofer was asked a question. This is occurring in 1837. The Chassam Sofer was asked a question from a rabbi in Krakow by the name of Rabbi Shaul Landau. Landau, a very well-known last name. Everyone knows a Landau, I think. But Rabbi Shaul Landau was asking him a question. Now, it's significant to know that when you look at the name and you know a little bit of the history of Krakow, you realize that this is going to be interesting. Why? Krakow in the year 1832 had an election for their new chief rabbi of Krakow. And the problem was, sounds Jewish, they couldn't come to an agreement who's going to be the next rabbi. So the result was that there were two rabbis. And different members of the Kehillah followed different rabbis. And as you can imagine, they didn't always see eye to eye. These were great Torah scholars, by the way. Tremendous Torah scholars, very devoted individuals. But that's the reality of how things work, unfortunately. One of them, and he was the main rabbi, he became the rabbi to the significant majority of the Jewish people in Krakow. His name was Rav Dov Ber Meisels, Rav Berish Meisels. You ever heard of the Meisels? Anyone with the last name Meisels? So they're descendants of this Rav Dov Berish Meisels. He was charismatic, Torah scholar. Historians are very fascinated by him because at that time, Poland was under the control of Russia and there were movements for Polish independence. And he was a big supporter of Polish independence. So historians discuss Rav Dov Ber Meisels, and eventually when he went to Varsha, he got into trouble with the Russians. The Russians didn't like him, okay? The rabbi who was a rabbi over a smaller percentage of the Kehillah, his name was Reb Shaul Landau. Our Reb Shaul Landau was going to be very soon asking a question to the Chassam Sofer. Now, Reb Shaul and Reb Dov Berish got into machloikis at times, one time about a get. Anyway, so as soon as you see a question being sent to the Chassam Sofer, by Rabbi Landau, you have to realize that there's more to it. And the story goes as follows. In 1837, there was a cholera outbreak throughout Europe, really. And this was not the first one. There were many such occurrences in 1831, 1829. Historians will give you a whole rundown of the cholera outbreak, how it occurred over and over again in waves throughout Europe. And in the city of Krakow, people were down. It's not fun to go through a pandemic. And they were concerned when there were bad omens, a bad sign. For them, for the community in Krakow, like my late father, not having the ability to do Kiddush Levana was a bad omen, a bad sign. So now, the problem was, it was the month of Kislev, it was the winter. Cholera seemed to be quite active in the winter as well. So this is the winter of 1836, 1837. And it's cloudy day after day after day, and they can't do Kiddush Levana, and people are getting worried. And then when it was the last night, it was the 15th of the month already, the moon showed up, and as they were running out to go ahead and do the Birkas Levana, it got covered up again by clouds. They couldn't do it. And the Oilem was really, really upset. And now, notes Rabbi Shaul Landau, Yadua, he tells us you should know, that the Rofim, that the doctors warn us that during a magefa, during a pandemic, you should be very careful. Shelo yitzta'aru. It's not good to be depressed. He notes especially when it comes to cholera that a bad mood or being depressed, right, weakens your immunity system, and you don't have the tools to fight the illness. Interesting. I think obviously we all know that the happier we are, the healthier we are. But he seems to say that when it comes to any magefa, so here's some halacha, by the way, you have to be happy now. You have to stay healthy and happy. Make yourself happy. And what we are told, by the way, is that during this period of time, lo yitznu alev shum da'aga. We shouldn't worry about anything. Don't worry. This is a period not to worry. Okay? This is what we were told by Rabbi Landau, quoted by Chassam Sofer. Now, the problem was they couldn't do Kiddush Levana, and they were getting depressed. People were mamish getting depressed. So Rabbi Landau realized that there's a minority opinion. There's a minority opinion that the Rishonim say that Kiddush Levana can even be said the 16th day of the month. The 16th day of the month, the eve of the 16th, which is for sure after the full moon. Nevertheless, there's such an opinion. So therefore, Rabbi Landau felt that to go ahead and address this issue, the people shouldn't be depressed. He went ahead and he paskined they could do Kiddush Levana. Now, some Sofer tells us that a few hundred people followed him. The feeling you get is that due to the fact that there was another rabbi in town, so this innovative rabbi, or at least regarding this matter, the one who tried to come up with this leniency to uplift the spirits of the people, now had to defend his position. So he writes to the Chassam Sofer, if you would agree post facto that it was acceptable to go ahead and give the allowance. So Chassam Sofer does note that during Magefa Hatsa'ar Misukan, there's no question that during a pandemic, being sad is dangerous. So therefore, he supported him, and he told him that you should know the need was great. I don't think Chassam Sofer would give a green light lechatchila, but he supported his activity. So anyway, regarding the time of Kiddush Levana, most of our discussions have been, what's the last time for Kiddush Levana? Okay, in the past we've also discussed the machlokes, because if you could say your Kiddush Levana half the month, and it starts from the new moon, what new moon are you going to follow? Are you going to follow the new moon that is announced in Yiddish in Shul? Or are you going to go ahead on the internet and find out what NASA believes is the time for the new moon? And there's a discrepancy because the new moon announced in Yiddish in a Shul is not precise, because it is an average, meaning when the rabbis tell us that the length of a month is 29 days, 12 hours, and 44 minutes, that's an average. So if it's an average, every month is different. NASA online can tell you the precise new moon. Which one do I follow? The precise new moon or the Yiddish new moon? So this is an interesting discussion, which we've discussed in the past, which touched upon in the past. But today's discussion, why is it called Kiddush Hayarech? Okay, so by the way, the question is also asked, Abe, why do we call it Kiddush Levana? It's not Kiddush, right? It's Birkat Levana, right? It's Birkat Levana. So the Sfardim call it Birkat Levana for that reason. But the term Yareach, yes, it appears in the Torah itself, and it appears in Tanakh. When it comes to brachos, often we use the language of Chazal, and Chazal talk about the Levana. In other words, at the time when the brachos were coined, they used the term Levana more than the Yareach. So that's why we use it. And there are other areas as well where we work with what the rabbis and the language they used for brachos that were coined. But it's a good question that is dealt by authorities. Now, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and have a discussion today. If you have the Marmakom, it's fine. If not, I put it on the screen. And we're going to study some Torah. And our discussion today is not going to be about until when you have for Kiddush Levana, but rather, and here we go, what is the earliest time for Kiddush Levana? What is the earliest time for Kiddush Levana? Now, the reason it's important is I always believe that when you see different communities doing things differently, part of your limud Torah is to understand why they do it and why do we do it differently. In other words, to study a machlokis that's how you study Torah, because then you develop an appreciation for both, and you realize that they're both Torah. And right now at Congregation B'nai Torah, when we operated in the past 4 months ago, as we operated, or in the future, Bezrat Hashem, we have several minyanim here with different practices, different cultures in the different minyanim. And one of the differences that is noticeable relates to Kiddush Levana, because there are times, it comes Motzei Shabbos, for example, this coming Motzei Shabbos, Be'ezras Hashem, if the sky is clear, I'm going to go ahead and do Kiddush Levana, and so should everyone who has the ability to do so. Okay, Kiddush Levana. On the other hand, members of Hasidic communities and Chabad communities and Sephardi communities, many of them would not do Kiddush Levana, would not do Kiddush Levana yet, but rather wait for 7 days after the new moon. Where does that come from? We only wait 3 days. They wait 7 days. Both these practices are not mentioned in the Gemara, not mentioned in the Talmud. So as soon as you have different practices and both of them have no sources in the Talmud, you should sit down and try to study where did these different minhagim, where did these different practices come from. That's Limud Torah. So that's what we're going to do today. We're not going to start with the Gemara, but rather we'll start with the Rambam, because the Rambam is going to present to us the most basic reading of tradition. And when you read the Rambam carefully, you'll realize something quite fascinating. And here we go. The Rambam tells us, you should know, that if a person, let me just see if I can move this thing away. No. Okay. Hold on one second. Okay. Imlo birech alea balel harishon. What does the Rambam say? If a person did not do the bracha, the Kiddush Levana, on the first night of the month, mevarech alea, you have the right to make a bracha ad shisha asar yom b'chodesh, until, and this is ad velo ad bichlal, not including the 6th day, but the Rambam tells us if you did not do Kiddush Levana on the eve of the first day, you could go ahead and do it through the 15th day, and he clarifies that that means that that could be done until it fills ad shetimale, until it fills in. It's pegimata. Pegimata comes from the word pagum, which means it's lacking area. When the moon, before it reaches the full moon, when it is waxing, there's a section that is darkened. We call it a pegima. We call it an area that is lacking. As long as the moon has not yet completely filled in, you could do the bracha on the Levana. That's what the Rambam tells us. What you see from here, that the Rambam held, that there is no question, Kiddush Levana can be said already on day one. In other words, as soon as you see the new moon, you go out, even tonight, according to the Rambam. I go out tonight, I see the new moon, 100% fine, even last night, and even the night before. That is the opinion of the Rambam. So there are two questions that we have to clarify at this point. Number one, where did we get the 3 days? I think we're all familiar that we don't do Kiddush Levana until we have passed 3 days. Where do we get that from? You are all familiar now that Hasidim are not going to do it until 7 days have passed. Where did they get that from when Rambam says otherwise? Talmud makes no indication. So our next source is going to be a quote from Masechet Sofrim. So I'm going to move forward to the Masechet Sofrim itself. Masechet Sofrim is a post-Talmudic source that has a tremendous amount of information. Many of our brachos and many of our minhagim originate there. It is a text that, as mentioned, is post-Talmudic, probably the 7th, maybe 8th century. And it was in Ashkenazi communities, it was extremely significant already 1,000 years ago. The Sephardim were less familiar with it. So Masechet Sofrim is going to be presenting for us some information. What you have to note and realize is that there were different girsaot, there were different readings. Once upon a time, things were studied in manuscript. Once upon a time, the way you would replicate a manuscript is have a scribe copying it. At times, the scribe would leave out something by mistake. Sometimes he would add to the side a note as an insight, and that unfortunately would become joined into the text at some point later on. So that's what we're going to study first here, a little bit of an issue of a girsa. But let's start with Masechet Sofrim. So here's a statement from 1,300 years ago. Ein mevarchin ala yareach. Masechet Sofrim tells us, do not make the bracha on the moon. Don't make a Kiddush Levana. Ela b'motzei Shabbat. Only Motzei Shabbos. Only Motzei Shabbos. Okay? Why? Because it is a time keshehu mevusam. He is mevusam. Now, what is exactly mevusam? Please don't tell me that you poured your perfume on you. Right? What exactly is the mevusam? Bosem, perfume, needs some level of clarification. You could be that you are in the Shabbos spirit. And then he adds that Motzei Shabbos, we're also wearing kelim na'im. We are wearing nice clothes. And due to the fact that Kiddush Levana has been compared to Kabbalas Pnei Hashchina, it has been compared to welcoming or accepting or greeting the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is obviously important that we do it with Kelim Na'im. Clean Na'im, be dressed appropriately. Now, these words, B'motzei Shabbat, are not in all manuscripts, it appears. So therefore, what we're going to do now is we're going to try to read the same Masechet Sofrim without 2 words. Okay, so let's try reading it without those 2 words. Ein mevarchin ala yareach, ein mevarchin ala yareach, ela keshehu mevusam, only when it is mevusam, comma, and then ubekli na'im, and also you should be wearing nice clothes. Now, this second approach, right, which is not, in the 1930s, a few rabbis put out an academic a reproduction of Masechet Sofrim comparing manuscripts. They did not find this manuscript, but nevertheless, it did exist. It did exist, that there were those that did not have those words b'motzei Shabbat. And now what you're going to try to figure out is, what do you think it means? Ein mevarchin ala yareach ela keshehu mevusam, which could mean when the yareach is mevusam, when the moon is mevusam. So that's what we're going to go ahead and study now. And we're going to study it from a source that originates in the 13th century. There was a great rabbi, his name was Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah is well known because he was a great zealot in Spain. And earlier on in his career, he was very much upset that Maimonides shared philosophical thoughts that in his mind were against Judaism. He was such a zealot that he led a movement against the writings of Maimonides to such an extent that the works of Maimonides were eventually burnt in France. He had charata. He eventually had complete regret. He did tshuva, and he wrote a work on tshuva that became a classic, the Sharei Tshuva. But he was a great halachic authority as well. And from what we study, not just his own works, but things that his disciples shared in his name. So what we're going to do is we're going to study an insight that originates from the disciples of Rabbeinu Yonah. And what we're going to be told, the Beis Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo is going to know the following. Medivrei, from the words of Talmidei, of the disciples, of Harav Yonah, of Rav Yonah, Nireh, it appears, Shelo haya gores, he did not have in Masechet Sofrim the words, b'Masechet Sofrim, ein mevarchin ala yareach ela b'motzei Shabbat. In other words, it appears that these two words, Motzei Shabbat, do not appear in the manuscript that Rabbeinu Yonah had in Masechet Sofrim. Now, how do we know it? Because now we're going to go ahead and analyze the words of Rabbeinu Yonah, and you're going to realize on your own that he obviously did not have those two words. Here we go. Shekatav, Rabbeinu Yonah says the following, and it appears in Sof Perek Tfilat HaShachar. So here we go. So Rabbeinu Yonah is talking, and he said, "B'Masechet Sofrim Omru." In this Masechet Sofrim, we are told, "Ein mevarchin ala levana ad shetitbasem." In other words, do not make the bracha on the levana until it, very clearly, it's talking about the moon itself, becomes mevusam. What does that mean? So Rabbeinu Yonah struggles with his reading, with his text, with his girsa of Masechet Sofrim. And he says, Yesh omrim, there are those that say, ad motzei Shabbat. In other words, there are those who explain Masechet Sofrim that what we are being told is, do not make the bracha on the moon until Motzei Shabbos. And why is Motzei Shabbos called a time Shumevusam? Shemevarchin ala b'samim. You know what happens Motzei Shabbos? You make a bracha on b'samim, on the spices that give you the pleasant aroma. That is a time that you are mevusam, and that is the meaning of Masechet Sofrim. Ein mevarchin ala yareach ela keshu mevusam. But Rabbeinu Yonah doesn't like that reading. Ve'ein ze mitkabel klal. This is not logical. Not logical. The ma'itaima uze litlot hadavar b'motzei Shabbat. It makes no sense. Why would you go ahead and link this bracha that has absolutely nothing to do with Motzei Shabbat and wait until Motzei Shabbat? It makes no sense. That's what Rabbeinu Yonah argues. It absolutely makes no sense. And therefore, he's going to come up with a new explanation, okay? And he's going to tell us the following. V'yesh mefarshim, there are those that say, shetitbasem is lashon chuppah, like a chuppah, something on top of you, something big, something that covers you, something that protects you. And he finds a reference to that idea in the Talmud, avid busma lebrei, a person made a chuppah for his son. And now, how does chuppah relate to the moon? So Ratzah Lomar, the idea behind it is as follows. You do not make a bracha on the moon. You do not make the Kiddush Levana until sheta'aseh kmo chuppah shehi gdola ktzat. So this is the first reference that Kiddush Levana is not to be said on the first day of the month, right after you see the new moon, This is the first reference. Think about this. Early 13th century, or I would say closer perhaps to the middle, or in the first half of the 13th century is the first time we hear of this idea that you should wait until the moon becomes a little bit larger, gdolaktzat. And you should wait until it is me'iras vivotea, where it produces some light. So that is his reading into the Masechet Sofrim. Okay? And then they share that Rabbeinu Yonah believed that it's the word mevusam has to do with mesheh tematek, sweetness, same idea, that there should be a little bit more light. And therefore, and we'll skip to the halachic part, that you should know, shezehu achar bet o gimel yamim. Here we have it. It seems to be that they assess that when do you start benefiting from the light of the moon? It takes 2-3 days. And here is the source for waiting 3 days. And because of this statement, which is quite fascinating, it is based on a reading of Masechet Sofrim that we don't even have. Based on that, we have a practice of waiting 3 days. And that became the more or less norm, okay? And the reason is that a yareach ben yomo, the first day, mitoch katnuto, it's so small, ein haor shelamatok, it produces no sweetness, no light, you don't benefit from the illumination of the moon. She'en adam nehene mimena. So here we have it. Now it's interesting to note, I'm looking at Ken here, the Vilna Gaon didn't buy this. The Vilna Gaon felt, wait a second, the Talmud says you can do Kiddush Levana after day one, right? There is no source at all in the Talmud to do so. And the Rambam, for example, has no issue with doing it day one. The Vilna Gaon believe that you could do it immediately as you see the new moon. And this is an important halacha because sometimes there's a debate in a shul because they read the Molad in Yiddish and it relates to the new moon in Israel. And people start debating, did the 3 days pass? Did they not pass? People get into fights in shul for these kind of things. So you have to remember that even if you are not actually on day 3 from the new moon, it's not a big deal. Number one, Rabbeinu Yonah himself says 2 or 3 days. And number two, the Vilna Gaon notes there's no need to wait the 3 days, right? So this is an interesting statement. For me, it's always interesting when you have one insight and it became the norm that we wait the 3 days. Another interesting piece of information is that we just read, according to the actual girsa of the Masechet Sofrim, Ela b'motzei Shabbat, only. And although it is mentioned and it is quite clear that it must be Motzei Shabbos, that's not the minhag. It's considered ideal to do it Motzei Shabbat, but in no way is it a must, because authorities note that since the Talmud made absolutely no reference to it being done only on Motzei Shabbat, therefore it is not a necessity to do it on Motzei Shabbat. So here we take that which is clear in Masechet Sofrim and that we don't exactly follow. And on the other hand, those things that are not clear became the norm. Very interesting, but Minhag Yisrael, that is what we do. So at least we have clarified the first part. Why do people wait 3 days? Based on the Rabbeinu Yonah's reading of Masechet Sofrim. But now comes the more interesting part. You know, we've studied often the impact of mysticism and Kabbalah on the practice of Judaism. And it's always a fascinating topic for me because things came in and became the norm, especially over the past few centuries. When you talk about mysticism, right, often people start off with the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria in Tzfat. People go to Tzfat and are inspired by this awakening that took place in the 1570s in Tzfat. They go there, they are inspired. To really appreciate the mysticism and Kabbalah, you have to go back to Spain of the late 13th century. And there are 2 significant texts that originated from there that really inspired this mystical Judaism, the Judaism that obviously is followed by Hasidim and by Sephardim. So one text is the Zohar HaKadosh, which makes its appearance at the end of the 13th century. The other one is one that I would say 99% of Jews have not heard of, but the impact is quite significant, and it only makes its appearance in halachic literature perhaps 3 times. And that is a work called Sha'arei Ora by a mystic, a mekubal by the name of Yosef Gigatilia. Yosef Gigatilia. He was a mystic, lives second half of the 13th century, and the impact of his work, those who study Zohar, Kabbalah, they go to with the Sha'arei Ora, and that's a go-to text. Rabbi Yosef Karo, what's interesting is that there are very few times that he quotes and makes it halacha. I would say that there's only 3 times that he really makes it solidified halacha. Here is one of them, that due to Kabbalistic teachings, Rabbi Yosef Karo believes Kiddush Levana is not to be done before 7 days after the new moon. And here we go, and that's what's going to be mentioned right here. Veharab Yosef Gigitilia. So now I'm quoting from Rabbi Yosef Karo, where he is quoting this Rabbi Yosef Gigitilia, Baal, the author of Sha'arei Ora, the author of a work called The Gates of Light, Katav B'tshuva. He wrote in a responsa. What does he write? That you should know, based on Kabbalah, She'al pi ha-Kabbalah. In other words, if your agenda in your fulfillment of Torah mitzvos is not just to follow what tradition or God told us, but rather to have the proper impact in the spiritual realm, if you want to follow that Kabbalah school, ein levarech, a person should not make the bracha al Kiddush Levana, the renewal of the moon, ad sheyavru alea zayin yamim, until 7 days passed. So this is the source that impacted, obviously, the Kabbalists and thus the Mekubalim, and obviously some of the Sfardim, and the Hasidim. I say some of the Sfardim because, for example, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef deals with an interesting struggle that some Sephardi/mystical communities have. Imagine it's Motzei Shabbos, right? It's, let's say, 7 days past Rosh Chodesh. Let's say it's day 8 already, or it's day 7, for example, but they did not have the 24 hours period from the new moon. In other words, when you say day 7, there are 2 ways to understand it. One is that 7 days of the month pass, meaning day 8, or it could mean 7 units of 24 hours. So what happens if it's Motzei Shabbos and you're smack in the middle between those 2 ways of measuring your 7 days? What do? So this is a debate among Sephardi authorities. And Rabbi Ovadia Yosef notes that you should know the whole idea of waiting 7 days, it's Kabbalah, it's not strict halacha, which indicates that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, even though he was a Sephardi posek, he retained this connection to the halachic system where he did not allow the later traditions of mysticism and Kabbalah to impact pure halacha. So that's an interesting discussion about the uniqueness of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and his psak. But here we have a source for waiting of the 7 days. Rabbi Yosef Gigatilia, one of the few locations where he makes reference to this idea. So here we have it, a little bit of an introduction to when we start the Kiddush Levana itself. We had, I remember one of the questions I've also dealt with is the following. Earlier I mentioned that when it comes to the last moment for Kiddush Levana, there's a shaila if you follow NASA or you follow the announcement in Yiddish, right? Which one do you follow? The same debate actually is relevant when due to the fact that we do have the practice of waiting 3 days. So now comes the question, when do I start counting those 3 days? Do I start from the new moon as announced in Shul, or do I start from the new moon based on what my computer tells me? So it's obviously far less significant when it comes to the start time, because the start time, as mentioned, it's not really a must to wait 3 days. Even Rabbeinu Yonah says 2 or 3 days, but it's an interesting thing to take into consideration. And we've discussed in the past that I remember Reb Hershel Schachter once visited Memphis. And I had the opportunity to sit with him and go through a whole series of questions. And he's a tremendous Torah scholar, as you know. And I remember one of the interesting questions I asked him, and he didn't have a clear answer, was the following. On Yom Tov, it's a mitzvah to eat meat, right? Daytime meal. On Yom Tov, it's a mitzvah to eat basar. So my question was, is liver considered basar? Now, there's a person who wants to have a chopped liver to be yaitze his meat. That was one question, not relevant to our discussion. But the other one was, I had a question to him when it comes to determining the half point of the month, or determining when is the full moon that prevents you from saying Kiddush Levana. Should I follow the calculations of NASA, meaning the reality, or should I follow that which is in Shul? And I think it would be consistent with the Reb Hershel Schachter. He says you follow NASA. In other words, the idea of Kiddush Levana is as long as the moon is waxing. NASA can tell you when it stops. Now, at one point, I thought I have a solid proof for what he has to say. At one point, okay, so David wants to know. I'll get back to my discussion. David wants to know when does someone say Kiddush Levana if they are above the Arctic Circle and there are 24 hours of daylight? So obviously, it's a very interesting question. I don't even know if you see the moon above the Arctic Circle. I don't know. If you see the moon, can you say it during the day? Very interesting, because the halacha does say it has to be Laila. Jews should not live there. Who's this? Live in Josh. Okay, so that interesting shaila, just shailas of Kriya Shema of Shabbos. That's an interesting question indeed. But I'll tell you a little bit with the Reb Hershel Schachter and the moon. So he told me follow NASA. And then I remember thinking that I found a raya. I found the proof to Reb Hershel Schachter, because there's a story that in the days of the Maharil, this is early 15th century, there was a solar eclipse. Now, a solar eclipse only occurs at the half point of a month, meaning you are obviously after a full moon after the solar eclipse. So the Maharil said that you should know after a solar eclipse, you can no longer do Kiddush Levana, even if it is within the 15 days. Why? Because what happens with the solar eclipse? With the solar eclipse, you have a situation that here is the moon, right? Here is Earth. Here is the sun. And what happens is that Earth is blocking the light that is supposed to reach the moon from the sun, and thus you cannot. It was the other way around. It was it was a lunar eclipse. I messed that up. I'm confused because a few days ago was the opposite. We were dealing with a lunar eclipse. So the Maharil tells us that when there's a lunar eclipse, due to the fact that the lunar eclipse is an indication that it reached half point, you can no longer do Kiddush Levana. So I thought that perhaps is a raya that you look at reality. Anyway, don't want to keep it more confusing than is. At least we had the opportunity of studying and the ability to appreciate when we see different schools and different practices, you know where it originated, especially something that is post-Talmudic, you know where it came from. That there are those that follow Kabbalah, and that's their approach to Judaism, and that's what makes them feel comfortable. Obviously, where I come from it's not my type of Judaism. I want to fulfill, based on what our tradition tells us, if someone was illuminated in the 13th century and felt that he could go ahead and add or change an halacha based on what he felt, for me, that is not the way I practice my Judaism. So therefore, with all due respect to Rabbi Yosef Jigitilia, I will continue doing Kiddush Levana after 3 days. And with all due respect to Arizal and Chassidim, we respect them all, but that does not obligate us to make that our path to Judaism. Okay, that's what we have for tonight. We're going to unmute everyone if you have any interesting questions or ha'aras. And everyone is, anyone. Jews should not live there, Josh says. Okay. Zeh sipur. Good.
So during the week, do you have to dress up as Bigdei Shabbos?
I have not seen anyone ever do it. Meaning, I've seen Kiddush Levana often during the week, right? People don't. I've never seen someone say, I'm going to run home. The only thing I have seen is that after Tisha B'Av, people, if let's say you want to do Kiddush Levana after Tisha B'Av, which is an interesting discussion on its own, at least you should have your shoes on. You should have shoes. The chumrah of putting on Big Day Shabbos, I have not seen at all. And at times you have to do it during the week when when Motzei Shabbos, it was cloudy and you did not have the opportunity. Okay, that's the aura. Very good. So next week, Be'ezras Hashem, perhaps we'll discuss a little bit about the 3 weeks. In 2 weeks from now, Shiva or B'Tammuz, there's no class. I have a little havamina, a thought of giving perhaps a little bit of a lecture at some point about my grandfather's activities during the Second World War. And I think I've talked about it here and there, but never a whole rundown. Very interesting individual, my grandfather. And perhaps in a few weeks from now, we'll do more of a lecture than a shir about his story. His story is interesting because, as many of you know, he was in Hebron, left before the massacres. His activity in South America was very, very interesting. So it's a person that perhaps to keep something a little bit lighter than our technical.
I think we can do Kiddush Levana. It looks like I'm looking at the channel, the weather channel.
What
So
do
probably
they
for sure by Monday.
What about Motzei Shabbos?
It looks it's showing possibly rain for Sunday, Shabbos and Sunday.
Okay, so we have 2 options: either to wait till Monday or tonight.
Friday night, it's nice, and Friday night there'll be a nice one also. But that's
Okay.
it.
Friday we have that interesting tradition of not to, right?
Right, you can make a nice.
Is it us to do it during the day?
It should be a night. The halacha says that it has to be when you're nehene la'ora. During the day, you don't do a Kiddush Levana. It says Laila. And even Ben Hashmashis, it's a question. Yeah, Kiddush Levana. That's that. Very good. Rabosai, I thank you for joining on this little discussion that we had today. Okay. And remember to be happy. That's what Chassam Sofer. Remember what Chassam Sofer says? Very important. We have to have a different type of El too, I think. We have to work on happiness. That's the only
Happiness.
Yeah.
You can watch the president tonight on Fox News.
Hashem.
Be happy.
Yeah, they're licking his boots there on Fox News a little bit.
He's having a town hall tonight
On Fox, obviously.
at 9:00.
Okay. Question is it reasonable to assume that the Rambam was aware of the Masechah Sofrim and did not consider it? Okay, the interesting question of why did Rambam ignore Masechah Sofrim? The Rambam would not take into consideration anything against the Talmud. Talmud makes no reference to it, so he's not gonna quote it at all. Meaning, it's the level of significance of Masechah Sofrim. For some, it was a very significant text, and for the Rambam, it's post-Talmudic. I'm not. But there's a lot of academic work on how the Rambam viewed Masechah Sofrim. But this would fit into it. Not impressed. Not one that was significant. That's a good point. Good. Rabosai, Erev Tov to everyone.
A good Shabbos.
A good Shabbos. We should keep me posted.
And then Shabbos.
Thank you so much for joining.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.